nonfiction is ultimately limited. We all know this. Every once in a while, there might be a work of history nonfiction or self help nonfiction that gets everybody riled up and gets everybody excited, but in the end of the day, it's not really that common. Of course, you should read that book that comes once a year or once every 2 years, depending on how much insight a certain genius has had in a certain year, in a certain period. But most nonfiction books that are being published today and being written today are great, are fantastic. They can change your life on a first reading, but ultimately they're kind of just reiterating ancient wisdom that is in ancient fiction, like in Shakespeare or Don Quixote, or things that are clearly fictional and that have been written a long, long time ago. And you can find a lot of those same tidbits and tips and stuff like that in that old fiction. You don't need to read every single self-help book that gets published year to year to year, because most of them are probably going to be the same. A couple of them, as I said, one or two of them every single year might have a revolutionary idea or a couple of revolutionary ideas, and you should definitely read those books, but do not obsess too much over it. Now, if the biggest advantage of reading fiction, which is, an increase of empathy, and that's great. An increase in empathy is something that we should all want. But if that isn't sufficient to you, because for me it's also not enough, just being a bit more empathetic is not a reason to read 2 hours every single day. I don't know how many thousands of hours of fiction in your entire life. I would implore you to look at the other benefits of reading fiction. For example, what is the best? I've heard this in a Chris Williamson podcast, on the Modern Wisdom podcast with Tim Ferriss. They argued that the best nonfiction is, how can I say it, the best nonfiction uses stories in order to make a point. And if you just look at most fiction, at most classics or contemporary works, it's not that hard to actually see the self-help in them, the self-improvement in them, because as I said in the first video I ever made on this channel, that goddamn piece of garbage that I look back at now with a lot of pride and a lot of shame, you just need to read fiction as non-fiction, and it will probably work out 10 times better. If you want to learn about revenge and love, toxic love, read Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. If you want to learn about the human condition in a certain period of time, or just our importance when it comes to just do the chronology of history, I would certainly pick up some Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I love that dude. I've read 2 of his books, so I can't really say I know him, but I would definitely recommend him. And of course, if you want to learn about politics and have a deeper understanding of the world, I don't need to say it. Read George Orwell. Read Animal Farm. Read 1984. Read some of his most obscure stuff, more obscure stuff, not most obscure stuff, like Homage to Catalonia, or some of his brilliant articles. There's so much things that are fictional that can help you 10 times more than a regular nonfiction book. And do not get me wrong, I love nonfiction to bits. I love things like Timothy Ferriss. I like podcasts that talk about history or recent events. They teach me a lot. But there is a lot more than you can learn from this fiction by just going through the process of, I'll put it like this: nonfiction serves everything on a silver platter. It gives you so many tips and it improves you, and yeah, it makes you a pretty great human being. A person that has read one nonfiction book is 10 times better than a person who has read none, because that first nonfiction book, it's also like ketamine or a drug, because it makes you feel as if you need to read more because of how big the impact has been on your life, but it's also like a steroid. It's a steroid. It's a drug. It's a steroid because it makes you a lot more powerful immediately, and it also gets you to crave more. That's wow. That's a perfect analogy. I'm so proud of that. God damn it. And what I wanted to say, nonfiction gives you everything on a silver platter. You don't need to deduce anything. You don't really need to use your brain to actually pluck out the meaning of some things, or actually get a sentimental attachment to something and actually get the lessons from that sentimental attachment and connection. With fiction, it makes you try a lot harder to actually get the main lessons. Now, for example, you could read a book about Stalinist Russia, and you would probably learn a lot. It would help you a lot to actually understand communism and stuff like that. But if you were to read Animal Farm, you would get it in an allegorical story fashion, in a fairy tale, in a, how can I say this? A wise, compassionate, and illuminating fable for our times, like the New York Times say. And you get it in with a bit of subtext, with a bit of nuance, even though it was written like more than 100 years ago, I think. If that's not correct, I might need to be punished severely for that, because if it's not more than 100 years ago, Jesus Christ, yeah, almost 100 years ago, not more than 100 years ago. I hope I have a lapsus. I don't know. I have a gap in memory. Yeah, like almost a century ago. And you get a bit of subtext, you get a bit of nuance, you get a bit of something that just telling you that Trotsky and Stalin were battling over the control of the Soviet Union. It's a lot more entertaining to read a story about two pigs that are fighting over power, over a farm, and just connecting it with the history that you already know. Because this book is very different based on what you already know, what you already have in this head. If you don't know anything about communism, the rise of communism, the fall of communism, the pain caused by communism, it's just a fairy tale about a totalitarian group of pigs. Okay, but if you know a bit of history, if you are cultured, it gains a whole new meaning. And that's why I love Animal Farm, and that's why I like fiction in general, because it changes based on the amount of time that you have lived. With nonfiction, yeah, you might resonate with certain tips, with certain passages more than others, because when you were younger, you might not have seen the value in them, or might not have related to them. But with fiction, that sentiment of connection with the thing that the writer is writing, that the writer has written, the author has written, in order to make it a more beautiful sentence, it is so much better. It is so much more powerful and pronounced. Because if you were to just read nonfiction for all of your life, you would get a lot of great things. And you would be an amazing human being, like a lot of people that only read nonfiction are. I'm pretty sure Elon Musk only read nonfiction as a kid, like 2 books a day, only nonfiction as a kid. So you could get really far. But if you want a bit of spiritual nourishment, if you want a bit of nourishment for the soul, and be a type of new rich, as Timothy Ferriss says, if you want to be successful, I don't know, rich, whatever you want to be, but also have a bit of a spiritual edge, you need to read fiction. And I recorded my first video about this more than a year ago, like exactly a year ago, on the 31st of October 2023, and I stand uncorrected. The point still stands. Read literature, imaginative fiction for a better life. I'll see you later.